So this will be a wide-ranging talk, but I'm calling it Moving Beyond Ego, the Doorways of the Soul. And I want to begin with a question that if you were certain that there was an incredible, colorful adventure that you could go on, one that would have no end, wouldn't you want to do this? And that's the question I would ask anyone in regard to the idea of spiritual awakening. The idea of spiritual awakening should not be a boring or overly serious one, although of course it is about the most serious or at least meaningful reality there is. But I want to ask it in this way because the journey of the soul is an adventure. It's the most beautiful, vital, colorful adventure you could possibly go on. Now, the world, in terms of the just the shallow, materialistic aspects of human perception and ideology, in this aspect of the world convinces us, or tries to convince us, that there's either nothing more than physical, mundane reality, or that the so-called afterlife is something separate from our human lives, something we wait for and long for, but can't really experience right here and now. And this is not the case, or at least this does not have to be the case. True spiritual awakening means infusing this life with the freedom and color of an eternal nature. This is what it means to be spiritual. It means bringing the vastness and the color of spirituality, which is not limited to human perception or limitations, bringing it in here into ourselves. And that's what the Spirit wants. The Spirit wants us to find joy in life, in this life, but true joy, true deep joy. The ego, on the other hand, is like an addict. The ego is unable to find this true joy, so it's depressed and empty when it's separated from Spirit. It's depressed and empty, and it fills itself with shallow and meaningless cravings and sensations. It's not that sensation or pleasure are bad. They are not. But a shallow and colorless version of what desire and feeling can be, this limits us. This deprives us of the true experience of living. That's why it's quote unquote bad. Not because desire is bad, not because feeling is bad, not because sensation or pleasure are bad. They are not. But the awakening person and the soul want deep and truly fulfilling versions of these things. The human experience is a beautiful thing, but we have to set it free of fear and hate and despair, the things of ego, when ego is disconnected from the broader reality of soul. This means owning our ego and submitting it to Spirit. I think when I say submitting, I think of wrestling, where you submit someone, meaning that you gain control. And that is the positive control which Spirit must gain over ego. Now, of course, it being Spirit, it's not forcing that upon ego. The ego must submit itself in the end. So really, it's not about Spirit submitting ego. It's about ego submitting itself to Spirit. There are tools, or at least ideas, that we can use to challenge the ego's ignorance and unwillingness to submit to Spirit. Tools we can use to awaken ego to the broader reality of Spirit. Because ego can awaken, and I say this often. Ego can awaken. Ego, separated from Spirit, is utterly blind and ignorant, and believes only in the reality of this linear world, the physical world, the sensations, basic simplistic psychology. Separated from spirit, ego is blind to broader reality, and any ideas of broader reality or religion or spirituality are just ideas. It has no first-hand experience, separate from spirit. But connected to spirit, the ego itself can become humble and awaken and join the broader, full reality of what we are. So there are ideas or tools we can use to bring this about. First, we can simply feel the fullness of ourself. We can feel what is within our deeper self. We can take time in meditation or prayer or contemplation or even fantasy, imagination, to explore the deeper aspects of who we are. This is about recognizing our spirit through first-hand experience. It is the path of feeling, not so much thought, but feeling what we are, touching things we don't have to understand necessarily, but we can feel. We can feel the reality of them. It's like love. Love can be felt this way and help us to understand our deeper nature. Love is not something we can prove exists, but we know it is real. When we feel love for our spouse or lover, for our child, for family, for true friends, when we feel true, powerful love, we know that it's real. In this way, we can explore the feelings, dreams, and desires that are deep inside of ourselves. Just getting to know them, feeling them, exploring them, touching them, holding them, experiencing them, not necessarily intellectually understanding everything, but this first thing I'm speaking about is just feeling what's there. Some people might do this in prayer, some people might meditate, others might just daydream or fantasize about different realities or possibilities, or even fantasy or sci-fi storytelling, or something like this. Just broadening our sense of what is possible, what's within us. So the point there isn't one particular path or another, but just to explore what we feel, all that we feel, what's there inside of us. Now that's one way, the way of feeling, and it's very important. But you can also challenge the ego through honest intellectual exploration. The intellectual exploration and questioning of all concepts of reality. So exploring concepts rather than feeling, looking at ideas, examining ideas of reality. The intellect is a wonderful tool if we use it honestly. For, in fact, truth makes sense. We just have to examine every idea with equal interest and skepticism. Truth does make sense. If we are willing to look clearly at every idea with the same clarity, with the same both skepticism and willingness to consider it when it does make sense, if we look at everything in an equal way and we examine ideas, then truth does actually make sense. And that's where I feel like it's always healthy to question everything. I mean, anyone who listens to me should question what I say, should examine the ideas that I'm putting forth to determine if they make sense, because truth does make sense. I believe in a geometry of existence, and examining existence means that if ideas are true, they will somehow fit in with other ideas. Ideas of spirituality will fit in with ideas of physics, will fit in with ideas of psychology, with ideas of culture. There's a sense or a shape that brings all truth together. So it's never bad to question ideas and to examine all ideas, even our own, with real just clarity and equality, looking at them all equally, examining them with the same level of either consideration or skepticism. Most of us defend and give the benefit of the doubt to our own established beliefs far more than any other beliefs. We just get into a mode of defense, of defending our beliefs, rather than really seeking the truth. We don't always engage ideas honestly, and it's vital that we look at ideas of reality honestly. And when we do this, it will become clear that there has to be a deeper component to our existence. Consciousness cannot simply be the product of unfeeling and unconscious matter. And I'm not going to get into this particular argument here in detail, but I do in my book and in other talks. But consciousness cannot simply be brought into being by unfeeling and unconscious matter. It's the opposite, of course. Matter and information and physics are an expression of an underlying consciousness. The visions and love that we feel inside, the self that we are, this cannot be illusion. That is not philosophically sound to imagine that our self, our consciousness is illusion. And if we look at spirituality and science with true reasoning and imagination, then we will understand that there is more than just this physical nature. This can challenge our ego and actually give our ego hope. Our ego has such a hard time believing in anything but its immediate physical wants and needs. So we have to discipline our minds and help ego to open itself to wider possibilities. And honest intellectual contemplation and even debate can help to do this. Most importantly, though, we have to be honest about ourselves. This cannot be overstressed in terms of the importance of just plain honesty about ourselves, about our own nature. We can't hide from the fullness of our human nature. This means that we have to challenge our fear. Fear is from ego, and even though fear can have its place, of course, caution and fear have their place in life, in experience, we have to challenge our fear. We cannot let fear be in control. And this means allowing our human nature to be more than we now accept. We can't fear the fullness of human nature. Society, most society, is really repressed. It really is. As open as some aspects of society are becoming, in general, society is conservative and fairly repressed. We have just so many hang-ups and insecurities and judgments about one another, about ourselves, and we have to challenge all of these. As long as everyone is free of everyone else and not destroying anyone else, we have to let people be whatever they want to be. In our personal experience, challenging ego, this means we have to stop coddling our fears. We are so serious about our little ego fears, the ego level moral judgments and repressions that make us look down on others, fear others, or even hate those who are different. When we stop coddling our fears, we can admit there are feelings inside of us that are connected to every human desire and expression possible. We're all different. Now, I say this in much of my writing, that we're all different and have different backgrounds and emotions and DNA and history, and this is why we can't judge one another, ever, in an ultimate sense. But we also all have a commonality. We're all connected by essential human and soul nature. So even though we're all different, there is a commonality there too, a basic human and spiritual nature or shape. And because this is so, there's no human desire in the world that does not exist inside of each one of us to some degree, in some small corner of our deeper psyche. Every possible desire or yearning or longing, although it might not be who we are and what we feel in any immediate sense, there's some seed of that in every one of us, because we're all human and we're all souls. This does not mean we have to identify with every possible desire or feeling, but it does mean we should open ourselves up to a broader range of possible feelings and even identity, how we identify ourselves. We should not limit that so much as we do. Taming the ego does not mean over controlling our desires. It means waking up to the deeper spectrum of desires within us. That's what it means to transcend ego, not to limit what we are, but to broaden what we are. The thing about the ego is that it is restrictive, not open. It wants control because it fears change and it fears the unknown, it fears mystery. The ego wants us to establish an identity and stick to it forever, once and for all. That's it, done. We know who we are, we know what we are, we know what reality is, we know what God is, and it's done, it's over, it's final. That's what the ego wants because the ego is seeking control. Now, discipline is good. Self-discipline has its place, but not when ego is the one trying to discipline us, to discipline itself. That's when fear enters the equation in a bad way, too much fear, restricting the vastness of our inner nature. The soul is not restrictive. The soul is all about awakening to reality, to the fullness of reality, and exploring it all. The soul wants us to be able to evolve. The soul needs us to open up wider and wider so that it can fill us and fulfill us. The soul wants it in us. The soul wants to open us up and fill us all up. So it doesn't want us to be all restrictive and afraid. It just wants us to be conscious. So as long as we balance our needs and desires with those of others, in other words, we live according to an ethic of relationship, we should try to broaden our own inner feelings and desires and sense of identity as much as possible. There's a vast unconscious aspect to every one of us. So much of us that in our human personality, in our ego identity, we rarely touch. It's like the part of the iceberg, to use a simple and classic analogy, the part of the iceberg that's underwater. It's so much greater than the portion that's outside, the portion we experience with our human everyday personality. The vastness of the unconscious, is so much more than our little ego personality. And this unconscious part of us holds so many, many things, so many desires, so many feelings, strange primitive hungers and desires, vast potential for creative change, and even the fullness of our soul, the full knowledge and wisdom and experience of our own soul. What we call the unconscious is unconscious. It's unconscious to our human personality, our ego identity, but this inner vastness beyond just basic human psychological unconscious and our shadow, this leads into the deepest colors of our soul. It leads into our soul. So this iceberg analogy, where you have our little ego personality as the tip of the iceberg and then the vast unconscious within, that unconscious holds our shadow side. It holds unconscious psychological desires and hang-ups and hurts and all of these things, but it moves beyond that and actually moves out into the vastness of our own soul. So as a ego, we're unconscious of much of ourselves, and often, if we're not in a journey of awakening spiritually, we're often unconscious of our own soul nature. So it's vital to our awakening that we tap into this deep unconscious part of ourself. We cannot hide from anything that we are or fear the shadows within. If we are afraid of the strange things inside of us, we can never get through these things to our own soul. People think they can circumvent knowing all that they are and become truly spiritual while denying so much of their nature. But this is always a limited kind of so-called spirituality. True spirituality means exploring everything we are, putting each thing in its place, yes, but not denying anything. When we see all that we are, we can sort through all of our feelings and desires and find the color of our soul. Then we can express this color in our human life and fulfill ourselves in the deepest way. We can't do that unless we are willing to see everything that we are and looking at everything with clarity and honesty and awareness and awakening, find the fullness of our soul. Of course, exploring everything that is in us, we need awareness and we need balance. There are certainly feelings that can cause us to do harm. There are shadows of primitive, hungry desires, even you could say demons that dwell in the vast shadows of every person. But this does not mean we should be afraid. We just have to balance our desires with conscious awareness of the deep shape of life, the shape of relationship, and the equality of the other. Then we won't follow desires that harm others, or identify with destructive feelings, making them ourself, making them who we are. We won't do that if we are aware of the deeper shape of life, the ethics of relationship. That's the balance, to allow ourselves to experience all that we are, but not to take any single feeling that might be destructive or harmful and to make it our identity as a human being, but rather to put this all in the context of that understanding of the geometry of life, the shape of relationship. As, as we find this balance between knowledge and freedom, all of our all of our ideas about reality will open up and evolve. Most especially our concept of ourself, but also our ideas about ultimate reality or God. This is just as important. Ideas of God, the ultimate reality, have sadly been used in history to oppress and repress humanity. This has to change. If we want to know God, we have to accept that God is beyond our control. The ego wants to think it can control even this ultimate reality, at least in our minds we want to do this. But this just, of course, it can't be done, and it's such a false sense of what God is, the reality of God is. It's definitely sad that religion speaks of God's greatness, but then insists that it understands exactly what God is, that God cannot be anything outside of that religion or that religious view. That's, in a sense, trying to make God great and then completely tiny at the same time, something we can totally control and have full knowledge of. Now, religion does come from spiritual experience. I believe every religion, every religious idea comes from some core spiritual experience. Somewhere there within it, there's true spiritual experience. But religion, in its developed form, is the set, codified version of spiritual experience. Religion still has good qualities, but it can also stifle our vision of ultimate reality. On a path of true spiritual awakening, we have to let go of false certainty. We can know things, of course, but too much certainty is always a sign of ego, and ego's fear, ego's desire to control and limit. Of course, we can know things, yes, but we have to acknowledge that beyond the circle of our understanding is an infinity of mystery. We cannot be afraid to acknowledge this. No matter how much we know, we are a finite being, a finite consciousness. Each one of us as individuals is a finite point of experience. So there is always an infinity of reality beyond what we are and what we know. We can sense ultimate reality, we can conceptualize ultimate reality, but not ever understand it perfectly in set and certain intellectual concepts. It doesn't mean we can't know things or have concepts or ideas. I have my own idea of ultimate reality. And I do believe it's true. I believe there's a shape to existence, as I often say, and it's the shape of relationship, both in human experience and in ultimate reality. But this knowledge does not limit me, at least, to a single vision of things. In fact, I believe that within this shape of relationship, there is absolute freedom, and so much that I cannot know and no one can know as far as the overall experience of all souls and certainly the ultimate foundational reality of God. There are, speaking of infinity, I would imagine that there are levels of dark and light, chaos and order, and mystery beyond imagination, that there are choices that free and awakened souls can make which might shock us to our core and disturb our vision of what awakening and goodness and spirituality mean. I would think that beyond the levels of true hell, the gray, boring, dull isolation from life and reality, there are also levels of fire and violence and wildness that are part of the free infinity, the experience of spirit, which are beyond any concept we might have of what life means. So even though I do believe in this shape of life, this geometry of existence, I do not limit existence to my concept of what that means. Beyond that basic geometry, I know that life is free of my experience, that it's beyond my experience, that certainly the reality of God is beyond my experience. We really have to stop insisting God is one thing specifically, a limited thing. God is all things that are real, all things that are authentic, all colors of true life. And what is real transcends the limits of our human experience and even imagination. As we begin to understand how much vaster existence is than we have ever conceived, our ego will feel fear. That's what happens. The ego feels fear about such vastness, but our spirit will feel great joy. The spirit longs for limitless horizons. The spirit longs for infinite potentiality, the infinite creative potential of our deepest self. The spirit desires endless paths into eternal lives. The desire of spirit is like a doorway inside of us. It whispers that there is so much more than what we think there is. It's sad to imagine that God put all of these feelings and potentials inside of us that we're not supposed to explore, that we're not meant to explore and develop. Or it's equally sad to say that these things are just a part of evil or sin or corruption. That's a sad, negative view of existence. Do we really imagine this vastness of feeling is either evil or not meant to be explored? This is such a terribly limiting view, and yet so many have insisted this limitation itself is spiritual, but it's not. There is no need to limit our desires as long as we understand the relational nature of existence. Why would we want to limit ourselves? Why would we want to limit our souls? Why would we want to limit our desires? Why would we want to limit God? The only reason is the ego's desire for control, the ego's fear and need for limitation and control. Of course, we can't think our freedom gives us the right to harm others. That's the line we draw. Our freedom, our ultimate freedom, does not give us the right to destroy others. But this is not about limitation. That is about awareness of the reality of relationship, love and relationship, which are, as we've seen, the door to life. So with awareness and awakening and consciousness, we can experience all desire in a way that allows all other life to exist. But this does not limit our freedom, or our pleasure, our desire, our potential to evolve and open up to infinite possibility. Because that's the path of soul, filling us, fulfilling us, and allowing us to develop all feeling, all desire in the context of infinite life and relationship with all things.